What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Stamina Dragonknight. So the Stamina DK is one of those stam classes that hasn't really aged very well. It used to be quite the powerhouse, and a lot of people were used to play Stam DK quite a few patches ago, but due to a couple of changes over the past few iterations, the past few patches, the Stamina Nightblade and Stamina Wardens got pretty hefty buffs, while the Stam DK has pretty much stayed where it has been in the past. That doesn't necessarily mean that it is a bad DPS, it's just that it doesn't quite match up to the Stam Nightblades. Reason for that is Stam DKs, a lot of their DPS comes from straight up DOS. They don't really have a true, what I would call spam build. They don't really have an execute either. But despite that, Stam DKs are probably one of the most consistent performing classes, mainly because a lot of your rotation is just basically keeping up your DOS the whole time. So in terms of consistency, Stam DKs are up there. You're very consistent DPS, but if you're looking to do the most DPS, then you probably want to go with the Stam Nightblade or Stamina Warden instead. Now, that being said, a Stam DK is definitely capable of pulling enough DPS to clear all the pieces of content in the game. You don't really have to worry about that. There just are stronger stamina specs out there right now. So, like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, skills, attributes, everything you need to know to basically recreate this build yourself. We will be talking a little bit about sort of replacement sets that you could run if you don't have access to certain expansions or DLCs, because we do make use of a few sets that require you to have the Somerset expansion. We'll talk about our rotation a little bit, just so you guys can get an idea of what it should look like. And we do have a little bit of a weird thing going on here because we are running Flames of Oblivion, so I will be kind of discussing how we're going to play that into our rotation. And then we'll do a 6-month dummy part so you guys can get an idea of the DPS that a Stam DK is able to pull. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here first, as always, with our gear. So, meta sets right now for Stam DPS has not changed at all. None of the new dungeon sets that came out with Wrathstone really supplanted any of the current meta sets. The current metas is still the strongest sort of combination of gear. So for Monster Helm sets, we do have Velidreth here. Velidreth is going to be the strongest monster helm in the game right now for Stamina DPS. This does come from Cradle of Shadows, so you will need to have access to the Shadows of the Hist DLC in order to grab this set yourself. The one piece adds weapon damage, which is going to be stronger than any sort of set that gives you additional max stamina, just because Stamina DPS have a lot more modifiers to weapon damage than they do max stam. And then the 2-piece, it shoots out 3 disease spores, and if the boss has a large enough hitbox, you're actually capable of hitting it more than once with 1 proc. If the boss doesn't have that big of a hitbox, or you're up against trash, then 3 disease spores can hit multiple enemies at once. So Velidreth does give you a little bit of additional cleave that's going to be very helpful in trash pulls. For our body set, we are running Relequen, so Relequen is still the strongest set in the game right now for Stamina DPS. So I have the perfect version here. You can go with the imperfect version if you would like. The perfect version armor pieces come from Vet Cloud Rest +1 or above. Jewelry comes from +2 or above. So if you don't have a team capable of clearing Vet Cloud Rest +1 or above, you can just run the imperfect version, which drops from normal Cloud Rest. The difference between the two versions is that additional max stamina bonus on the 5-piece that is only there on the perfected version. The difference between perfected and non-perfect is pretty small overall. You're talking about probably less than 1% DPS overall. But you do need to have access to Somerset in order to get this set here. And then for our front bar set, we're going with Deadly Strikes. You can go with... Oh, do I have Advancing Yokeda? I should have Deadly Strikes. Here it is, Deadly Strikes. So this set is an older set. This is an older PvP set that's been in the game for quite a while. But in Wrathstone, it was updated to basically change it from a 3-piece set to a 5-piece set. So the 5-piece set increases the damage your physical, bleed, poison, and disease damage deal by 14%. So pretty much that covers almost all of our DK abilities. The only ability that's really not affected by Deadly Strike would be Flames of Oblivion. Everything else is pretty much all affected by Deadly Strike here. So this is a pretty strong set, very good synergy with Stamina DKs. Then for our back bar, we're all running the Maelstrom Bow with a weapon damage enchant, and it is infused. Now for a couple of gear substitutions here, because Velidreth, we'll start off with a monster helm. Velidreth, you do need to have access to the Shadows of the Hist DLC, so if you don't have access to the DLC, you basically have 2 monster helm sets that you can use, arguably 3. So the first monster helm set that you could run instead of Velidreth is going to be Spawn of Mephala. So this is a base game set. You can get this from Fungal Grotto 2. It gives you max stamina, which is not quite as strong as the weapon damage bonus from Velidreth. And so when you deal damage with a fully charged heavy attack, you create a web for 10 seconds that deals X amount of poison damage every second to all enemies within 4 meters and reduces their movement speed by 50%. So this just has a little bit of nice synergy with stam decays, mainly because of that additional poison damage that it deals. Stam decays largely do not do heavy attack rotations anymore. However, you can still start off with the heavy attack on your front bar, so you can just start off with the heavy attack and you'll be able to proc it this way. That way you can have it proc while you're on your front bar, do your back bar rotation, and then go back to your front bar, do another heavy attack, and it should be off cooldown that way. Not going to be particularly strong compared to our other alternative sets, but it's still an option nonetheless. Selene's is going to be the best option for a base game set. So this is a base game set from Selene's Web. Again, very similar to Spawn and Mephala. Max stamina is the one piece, and then the two piece basically is a frontal attack that hits the closest enemy to you, and it procs off of any direct melee damage. So unlike Selene's, it does not have any sort of cleave, even though it does look like it should have cleave. It only ever hits one enemy at a time. It does have a shorter cooldown and does have a higher tooltip compared to Velidreth, so it can actually do a little bit more DPS compared to Velidreth does, just to pure proc. However, the max stamina versus the weapon damage is what pushes Velidreth ahead, along with the fact that Velidreth can hit more than once per proc if the boss has a large enough hitbox. And then the final Maelstrom set that you might want to consider picking up is going to be Stormfist. So Stormfist is another base game set from Tempest Island. The one piece adds stamina regen, which is okay. It's not going to really give you any sort of additional DPS. It'll basically allow you to sustain a light attack rotation for a little bit longer, but stam decays don't really have that big of a drain issue compared to, let's say, a Stam Sork or a Stamina Templar. And when you deal damage, you basically deal a certain amount of shock damage every second for 3 seconds, and you deal a final physical damage hit. So this adds a little bit of additional cleave. So out of all the different sets, Stormfist and Spawn and Mephala, both of them do have additional cleave, a 4-meter cleave radius. However, Stormfist and Mephala both share the same weakness, which is when it procs, the proc stays put. So if the boss happens to move out of your Stormfist or out of Mephala's proc, then you basically lose out on any sort of additional damage that might have been caused while that boss is in that proc. So on more mobile fights, Stormfist and Mephala are definitely going to end up losing out to Selene's. Velidreth is still going to be the strongest Monster Helm set overall, just because, again, the proc can hit the same enemy more than once if the hitbox is large enough. Plus, if you do need to move around or if the boss is mobile, you can at the very least try to aim Velidreth so it does end up hitting the boss anyway. So for terms of body sets that you could use to replace Relequen. So Relequen, you do need to have access to Somerset. So if we don't have access to Somerset, you do have a few options when it comes to body sets here. The first set that I'm going to be talking about is a drop set from Hrothgar. So you do need to have access to Hrothgar if you intend on farming this yourself. If you intend on buying it off of guild traders, then obviously you don't need to have access to the Hrothgar DLC. So Briarheart here, whenever you deal crit damage, you basically have a chance to increase your weapon damage by a certain amount for 10 seconds. And while this is also active, any sort of critical hits you deal will also heal you as well. So this gives you a little bit of additional heal. And on top of weapon damage. Now, ideally, this would probably be best used as a front bar set. So I would not necessarily use this as a body set, but you can do so if you desire. The proc does carry over to your back bar, which is why it makes for a good front bar set as well. But like I said, you can wear this on the body as well, so that way you will always be able to proc that every 15 seconds here. Other sets you could run instead, you have to find them all. Leviathan is a body set that you might want to consider running. So this is a dungeon set from Crypt of Hearts, medium armor set. So this is basically the stamina version of Mother Sorrow. It just gives you a lot of weapon crit. So because the 5-piece is a static bonus, you do want to have this on the body, so that way you don't lose it when you decide to bar swap. If you do have it as a front bar set, you're losing over 10% crit on your back bar, which is not really ideal. So if you do want to run Leviathan, you're going to want to run it on your body or as jewelry pieces. There are a few other sets here. Let me see if I can find them, because I have a lot of sets here. I think that is... Oh, I know where it is. That's because I don't have it. So the other set that you might want to consider running, I just have to find it here on the list. Going to be Hunding's Rage. So Hunding's Rage is a crafted set. It does require 6 traits to be able to craft a single piece. So you will have to invest a little bit into kind of your research traits in order to be able to craft Hundings yourself. But if you don't have the traits required to craft Hundings, you can usually find somebody who will be able to craft it for you, usually for a small fee, or just for the materials required to craft the pieces that you need. Very similar to Leviathan, it is a static bonus on the 5-piece, so you do want to wear this on your body so that way you don't end up losing the 4 and 5-piece when you bar swap to your back bar. So that is a pretty easy set to obtain here. You can also run, let me see if I'll find it here, Mechanical Acuity. Mechanical Acuity is going to be a little bit weaker on Stam compared to Magicka, because Stamina does typically run higher weapon crit compared to Magicka. But this is another potential option for you to run. So this is also a 6-piece crafted set, but it is a Clockwork City DLC crafted set. So you need to have access to the Clockwork City DLC, or know somebody who has access to the Clockwork City DLC and have them craft it for you, or very similar to Hunding's Rage, you can just buy it off of guild traders. So the 5-piece, whenever you deal direct damage, you have a chance to basically get 100% crit chance for 5 seconds, and this is going to occur every 18 seconds. So basically just gives you a lot of crit on that 5-piece. Now the downside of Mechanical Acuity is the 3-piece doesn't really help you all too much because it adds spell damage, so you are giving up 1 armor bonus in order to run Mechanical Acuity. But it is an option if you do want to run this. This can be used as a front bar set if you so desire, because it is a proc set, so it will carry over to your back bar if it happens to proc while it is on your front bar here. Now you can also run Deadly Strike as a body set as well, because Deadly Strike does now drop in medium armor, so you can wear this on the body if you so desire. That way you can keep that 5-set bonus active at all times, and you can run something like Briarheart and Mechanical Acuity on the front bar instead. You can do that instead. But if you are running Relequen, you want Relequen on the body, so Deadly Strike will be your front bar set instead. Now in terms of traits enchants for jewelry, armor, and weapons, for all your armor you're going with all divines and all max stamina enchants. And then for your jewelry pieces you're going to go with all weapon damage enchants, and then you have 2 options for jewelry traits. So I have 3 Bloodthirsty right here, which is usually going to be the strongest option for you. However, there are going to be a few fights and a few instances where Bloodthirsty is actually not going to be stronger. Infused in these cases will end up being a little bit stronger. So your options are basically either Infused or Bloodthirsty. You can go with either combination thereof. Just bear in mind that if you are going to be transmuting jewelry, you do need to have access to Somerset in order to gain access to the jewelry crafting skill line. So you will need to have access to Somerset if you do want to transmute jewelry here. I just realized there is one more set that I forgot to mention here, and that's going to be Berserking Warrior Advancing Yokeda. I completely forgot about this set, but this is a base game set. You can get this from Hellraw Citadel. It is a heavy armor set though, so you do need to get jewelry and the weapon. So this is definitely going to be a front bar set here. So this basically just adds a lot of crit damage while you are on your front bar whenever you deal melee damage. So because this is a heavy armor set, you will need to have access to Somerset in order to make use of Advancing Yokeda, because the jewelry will come in healthy and you will need to transmute that. So if you are going to be running Advancing Yokeda, you do need to have access to Somerset in order to make the most use out of this set. Now, for our weapons, the traits are the only thing that really matter here. So we're going nirn on the main hand and sharpen on the offhand. I have dagger sword just because they don't give you coffers for Deadly Strike on the PTS, so I had to try my luck at getting Deadly Strike options from Bruma, and I only got a dagger and a sword. So you should be going with double daggers, but dagger sword is what I am stuck with here just because of RNG. And we are not really caring about the enchant because we are using poisons instead. We're using alchemical poison, we're using the damage health poison. This can be created by using Fleshfly Larva, Nirn Root, and Nightshade or Violet Coprinus. So that damage health poison will suppress your enchant, which is why we don't really care about our enchant too much. You can just keep the default enchant as long as the traits are the same. So you do want to have Nirn on your main hand and Sharpen on the offhand. Now you can also run double sharpened if you would like, and you can adjust your TP accordingly, so that is another potential option there. We are going Nirnhone and Sharpen, and we are dumping a lot of points into piercing because we will be using the Shadow on this. But if you want to stick with the Lover Munus instead, then you can do something like Nirnhone in the main hand and then Precise on the offhand. So if you're going Lover, go Nirn Precise. If you're running the Shadow, you can go either Nirn Sharpened or Double Sharpened. And then for your back bar, I already mentioned this, Maelstrom Bow, Infused, Weapon Damage, Enchant. So that's all of our gear options here. Let's go over our character sheet. So I am a Dark Elf. Dark Elves are one of the best races for Stamina DPS right now. The absolute mathematically superior race is going to be the Orcs. So Dark Elves get 1875 weapon damage, or 1875 max stamina and 258 weapon damage. And they also get that same max magicka and spell damage bonus. Orcs get 2000 max stamina, 1000 max health, and 258 spell damage, so weapon damage I should say. So orcs are going to be a little bit stronger than dark elves. If you do want to play a magic DK on the side, then dark elves is going to be your best option there because they do get that 1875 max magicka and 258 spell damage. So if you kind of want to play both Stam and Magicka DPS, then Dark Elves is going to be the best option for you. But if you just want to play pure Stamina DPS, then the Orcs are going to give you a little bit more DPS compared to the Dark Elves. There are 3 other races that you might want to consider running as a Stamina DPS as well. First one are going to be the Khajiits. So they have 10% additional crit damage, and they get 825 Magicka health and stamina, and 85 Magicka and stamina regen, and 100 health regen. So the 10% additional crit damage done is going to be a little bit weaker than the 258 weapon damage that the Dark Elves and the Orcs have, but it's still going to end up boosting your overall DPS. The other 2 races are going to be what I call sustain races. So these 2 races are more suited for sustain rather than raw damage. So the Red Guards and the Wood Elves, they both get 2000 max stamina. The Wood Elves get 258 additional stamina regen, and the Red Guards get 950 stamina back whenever they deal damage with a direct damage attack every 5 seconds. So those 2 races, even though they do get the 2000 max stamina, they don't get any sort of additional damage sort of passives in their ratios at all. They get a lot of sustain, but they don't get any pure damage. So their sustain is going to be very, very good if you decide to play those 2 races, but your overall damage output, your damage potential is going to be a little bit lower just because you don't have the weapon damage that the Orcs and Dark Elves have. You don't have the additional crit damage that the Khajiits have. So those are basically your race options there. Attributes all points into stamina here. No surprise, you want to maximize your DPS. Now, if you want to improve your survivability by a little bit, maybe you're dying a little bit too often, you can shift a few points into health. I personally would not put any more than 10 points into health. At that point, you're kind of giving up a little bit too much DPS that way. Moving on, our Mundstone, we are going with the Shadow. I did mention earlier that you can go with the Lover instead, and that will be a completely different sort of CPs, and I will go over your 3 different CP options when we go over our CPs. And then finally for our food, for the purposes of the parse, I am using Lava Foot. So this is parse food. This basically helps imitate getting orbs on cooldown while I'm using blue food. In an actual raid, you can either use blue food or you can use Dubious Camoran Throne or Artaeum Thickaway Broth. Personally, I would recommend running Dubious Camoran Throne or Artaeum Thickaway Broth just because those do give you a little bit of stamina regen. While Stam DKs don't have quite the same sort of sustain issues that Stam Sorks do, they still do have, generally speaking, a little bit higher drain compared to regen. They aren't quite able to sustain quite as well as Nightblades, Templars, or Wardens, so it is nice to have the additional regen from Dubious Camoran Throne or Artaeum Thickaway Broth in an actual raid. Now for our skills, our front bar, we have Rending Slashes, Venomous Claws, Noxious Breath, Silver Leash, Rearming Trap, and Flawless Dawnbreaker. So we're not really using Silver Leash here. You can really replace this with any of the Fighter's Guild active abilities. This is here for the additional weapon damage you get from Slayer. And the same thing with Flawless Dawnbreaker. This is mainly here for the weapon damage, but it's not really going to be used all too much as our primary ultimate. Then our back bar, Razor Caltrops, Poison Injection, Endless Hail, Flames of Oblivion, Rearming Trap again just for the weapon damage bonus from Slayer, and then we have Standard of Might. This is going to be our primary ultimate that we're going to end up using. You can use the Ballista ultimate instead, so that's the Bow ultimate here. It's up to you which one you want to run, but Standard of Might will do a little bit more DPS. The actual Standard itself will not do quite as much damage compared to like on a Magicka DK because it does do flame damage, but the real bonus of Standard of Might is that 50% additional damage done that you get while you're standing in your standard. For more mobile bosses, because you do need to be within the standard in order to get the damage done bonus, you might still want to swap this out with Ballista, just because Ballista is going to be a little bit better for more mobile bosses there. Now for our champion points, the CP cap has remained the same between Murkmire and Wrathstone, so it is still 810, which gives us 270 points to put across each of our 3 different constellation types. Starting off with our green CPs, 75 into Mooncalf and 75 into Tenacity, and that gives us 120 points to put into the remaining nodes, really however we'd like. But I have 40 Shadow Ward, 40 Tumbling, and 40 Warlord. You can bump Mooncalf up to 100 and Tenacity up to 100 for that last 1%, in which case you have 70 points instead of 120 to put into the remaining nodes, really however you'd like. Now for our blue CPs, so I'm going to show you guys the Nirn Sharpened configuration, then I'll show you guys the Double Sharpened, and then the Lover configurations. So for The Nirn main hand sharpened offhand configuration with the Shadow. I have 49 into Mighty, 64 Piercing, 56 into Precise Strike, 61 into Thaumaturge, and 40 into Master at Arms. Now, if you are going double sharpened, you're gaining 1376 additional penetration on your main hand, which means we can drop Piercing down to about 3000 or so. So you would drop this down to roughly 36 or so. You would be able to bump up Mighty back up to 64, be able to bring Precise Strikes up to 61. Thaumaturge can go up to 66. Actually, you need to drop one more point out of Piercing here, so we can bring Master at Arms up to 44. So for double sharpened, 64 Mighty, 35 Piercing, 61 Precise Strike, 66 Thaumaturge, and 44 Master at Arms. Now, if we're going with the Lover instead, we get 4196 additional penetration from the Lover, at which point we will be using Nirn main hand, Precise offhand. So 4196 compared to the double sharpened, which gives us, I believe it is 2756. That is an additional about 1400 or so additional penetration, so we can drop this down even further to about 24 into Piercing, and then we can just bump Precise Strikes up to 66. Thaumaturge can be bumped up to 72. And then we can keep Master at Arms at 44. Because DKs generally run more dots, we don't need to put as many points into Master at Arms. So for Lover, with Nirn and Precise, we have 64 Mighty, 24 Piercing, 66 Precise Strikes, 72 Thaumaturge, and 44 into Master at Arms. Finally, for our red CPs, this particular setup that I have is a more balanced approach, so you'll be able to get very good mitigation across all the pieces of content, but if you want to maximize your mitigation for any single trial or single piece of content, you will need to kind of shift your red CP points around a little bit in order to best maximize your mitigation. So I have 81 Ironclad, 61 Thick-Skinned, and 64 into both Hardy and Elemental Defender. Alright, so that is pretty much it for the build information. Now let's go ahead and talk about our rotation. So I'm going to pull out our trusty 3 million dummy so you guys can get an idea of what the rotation is going to end up looking like while I kind of discuss it. So, like I mentioned earlier, DKs, your damage pretty much comes from all pure dots. You don't really have what I would call a true spammable. We are going to end up using Venomous Claws as our spammable, but that's still considered a dot. So I don't really see that as a true quote-unquote spammable just because there's a dot component associated with it, but we will be taking advantage of the fact that it is a fairly low cost in order to use it as our spammable. So you can see here it only costs 700 stamina. The other spammable that you might have seen being used in some other Stam DK builds is going to be Shrouded Daggers, which cost nearly 3 times as much, so it's going to be a lot harder to sustain Shrouded Dagger, even though Shrouded Dagger does give us additional cleave. So if we compare this damage to the Venomous Claw damage, we're losing so the base hit itself is about 3000 less. We do get 1 tick of Venomous Claw off the dot component when we do use it as our spammable, so it's not quite as bad. We are giving up a little bit of damage, but we're gaining a lot of sustain as a result, meaning we don't have to use as many heavy attacks, which ends up being about a wash overall in terms of overall DPS. Now in terms of rotation, so we are going to have a little bit of a weird rotation here. So we are going to try to minimize the time that we're on our back bar here because we do want to maximize the time on our front bar to take advantage of Deadly Strike. If you're using Advanced Yokeda instead, which is very close to Deadly Strike in terms of pure DPS, you will want to minimize the time you're on your back bar to at most 3 abilities. 4 is kind of pushing it there. So we do have 4 abilities that we need to use on our back bar. We have Endless Hail, Razor Caltrops, Poison Injection, Flames of Oblivion, and then sometimes we also will need to use Standard of Might for a total of 5 global cooldowns on our back bar. Now Flames of Oblivion, you consider it as a 15-second dot because it has 15-second duration. Endless Hail is 10, Poison Injection is 10, Razor Caltrops is 12, so it doesn't really line up very well. Plus we need to minimize the time that we spend on our back bar to 3 abilities at a time. At most 4, and sometimes we will need to use standard. So generally speaking, what you're going to be doing is going to be a little bit of a dynamic rotation, but it is mostly static. So basically, we just want to keep an eye on Flames of Oblivion, and if it does happen to drop, you're just going to want to just re-up it if you're on your front bar. In some instances, you'll be able to use it on your back bar, and I'll show you guys what I mean when we kind of go over our rotation. So your rotation is pretty much going to look like this. You always want to start off with our Rearming Trap, obviously. Use Noxious Breath, and then we're going to use Venomous Claws as our main spammable here. Before we go to our back bar, just drop your trap. You see Flames of Oblivion is off, so I go back, re-up it, and then go back to my front bar rotation here. gonna see if we can get an instance where cooldown on Flames of Oblivion matches up better. Our backbar dots. This might be, yeah, it's gonna be this one here. So in this instance, you can see here that Flames of Oblivion is gonna run out while we're on our backbar. In this instance, we're going to cast Flames of Oblivion, go to our front bar, do Noxious Breath, go back and finish off with Poison Injection. And then we continue on our merry way here. I'm just going to kill the dummy here so I don't have to wait for it to reset. So that's the general idea. So if you do happen to be at a point where you have Endless Hail, Caltrops, Poison Injection, and Flames of Oblivion all sort of activating at the same time, you can activate them all at the same time. Do Endless Hail, Caltrops, Flames of Oblivion, swap to your front bar, use Noxious Breath, go to your back bar, do your Poison Injection, and then swap back to your front bar to finish off your rotation that way, your front bar rotation that way. Now, if you do have a standard up, you're going to want to try to bar swap cancel out of it if you can, just because the animation is a little bit long. You can block cancel out of it, but I don't recommend doing that. It's better off just to swap to your back bar, lay it down, and then bar swap cancel out of the animation back to your front bar if you can. So that's my recommendation for standard, but it's kind of up to you. The animation itself is actually not terribly long. You are gonna be sitting through it though. You do end up eating up, I think, about 1 global cooldown or so. So with all that said and done, we're going to go ahead and do a 6-man dummy parse so you guys can get an idea of the DPS that we're able to pull here. Now do bear in mind that stam DKs do have a source of major fracture through Noxious Breath here. Noxious Breath is not going to be 100% uptime though, so we're not going to have pure 100% uptime on major fracture, but it is still something you want to keep in mind here. So we will have higher DPS running on a stam DK self-buffed parse compared to on some other classes. So just bear in mind, stam Zorks don't have major fracture, stam Templars only have minor fracture, but Wardens and Nightblades do have their own source of major fracture. Also bear in mind we don't have minor Berserk. This is a self-buffed parse, so this is not necessarily going to be indicative of what you would be able to perform, the level you'll be able to perform at in an actual raid buff scenario. So if you want a true sort of comparison, you will want to take a look at raid buffed parses instead of self-buffed parses. But this should give you a good idea of where stam DKs sort of stand compared to other classes. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Again, bar swap cancel out of our standard. End our front bar rotation with Rearming Trap. Go to our back bar to make sure we re-up Flames of Oblivion as soon as it's off cooldown. So all 4 of our active abilities are off cooldown. We'll use 3, go to our front bar, and finish off our back bar rotation there. Now a Master Warrior. So again, do 3 for our front bar, and swap back to our back bar to finish off that rotation. Good practice to kind of get into that, especially if you're using Advanced Yokeda instead of Deadly Strike here. Right, so there we have it. That is our stam DK parse. We managed to pull, once it's up here, 48.7k. So just remember here that we do have Major Fracture in our parse here, and we have 79% uptime on Major Fracture, so not completely comparable to something like a Warden or a Nightblade that can maintain 100% Major Fracture uptime. So this would be a little bit higher if you do want to kind of compare it to a Warden. You'd also have to add in about 8% DPS because of Modern Berserk that both Wardens and Nightblades have, so that's just something you want to keep in mind here. So overall, like I said, pretty good DPS overall, but they really haven't moved all too much compared to where they were 2, 3, 4 patches ago. But still, plenty of DPS in order to complete pretty much all the pieces of content in the game. With a little bit of practice, I'm sure I could probably hit about 50k or so, maybe up to 51k self-buffed on my Stam DK here. As you can see here, Venomous Claws, if we're using it as a spam build, does a pretty good amount of DPS. So we do have a few hits of Venomous Claws here. We have 2 hits. So one of them is the direct damage, and the other one is the damage over time component. I believe it is this one that is the direct damage, and this is the damage over time component. I'm not one. No. Actually don't know which one it is because they both have stars here, but you can see that even though it doesn't do a lot of damage on the initial hit, it does do quite amount of DPS as our main spam bull here. Flames of Oblivion, surprisingly, even though it does flame damage, does a good amount of DPS comparably. It does about as much as the Rearming Trap Dot does, so pretty nice to make sure to maintain Flames of Oblivion here. With Flames of Oblivion, you just want to make sure that you always let it run out because it does shoot off one more fireball when it completely runs out, so you don't want to re-up it too early because then you're giving up one of those fireballs instead. So that is pretty much it for this build video. Hopefully you guys found this informative. If you guys have any questions or comments, please leave them down in the comment section below. And I will see you guys in the next dungeon.